Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share Dogman encounter horror stories. First story. I saw a black dog with glowing eyes, and no one else could see it. I was in elementary school, about 8 to 9 years old, and am 25 now, when this happened, and no one believed me. I know what I saw, and I remember it very clearly to this day. My cousin and I were walking with my grandpa at a walking trail just in front of a heavily wooded area. At the time, people got creative and built wooden teepees out of fallen branches and sticks along the trail. I ran ahead of my cousin and grandpa and tried to crawl in one of the teepees when I looked up and saw a black with glowing yellowish-green eyes. He and I just stared at each for a good minute. His eyes were kind of narrowed, as if warning me to not get any closer. I called my grandpa and cousin over and told them about the dog, but when they looked in the teepee directly at the dog, they looked at me as if I was making it up and said they didn't see anything. I was looking back and forth between them and the glowing-eyed dog, which was very clearly visible, and they truly couldn't see him. My grandpa and cousin brushed off my claim because they saw nothing and made me walk away from the dog in the teepee. We passed the same teepee on the way back to get to the parking lot, but the dog was gone by then. I have since been back to those walking trails many times over the years, and I have never seen this dog again or any sign of him. Can someone give me insight as to why I was able to see him, but not my cousin or my grandpa? Why he was there? Why his eyes glowed in daylight? What meant seeing him? Second story. What it was. So I'm driving home yesterday night, and it's about 10 p.m., I'm almost home, and where I live there are a lot of woods, but I'm driving, and my bright lights hit this very tall, human-esque creature run across the street at like 100 miles per hour and disappear. The best I can describe, it is a human-esque creature, looked like a very, very tall and very, very skinny woman with incredibly long hair, had no other features, no body weight or muscle tone, and it was as dark as a shadow, jet black. If my lights weren't on it, it would have blended in with the darkness. I told my family about it and laughed it off as I inherited spiritual sensitivity from my mother, and I see and hear things all the time. But then I had 2 nightmares last night. Each were some of the most traumatic things that have ever happened to me. I know the land I live on used to have Native Americans living on it, so I don't know if that's what I saw in Native American spirit or if it was a demon due to the nightmares I had, but I just want thoughts. Third story. Hellhound, looking for answers. I downloaded Reddit to post this in the hopes of finding some answers. If anyone has similar experiences, please let me know. It's been several years now, and I still find myself thinking about this encounter multiple times a week. My wife and I are both very sensitive to energies that most people around us are not. We've each had our share of far-out paranormal encounters separately, and since we've been together, it's been one hell of a ride that just seems to get more far out as time goes on. Backstory, while we were building our house, we were living in a large wall tent on our property. It was a pretty large for a tent, almost 400 square feet, so you could easily walk around in it. It had our full-size bed on a bed frame in there, a kitchen area, and a table with several chairs. It even had a canvas drop cloth as a floor, so we weren't walking around in the dirt. And I had the sides folding in and weighted down all the way around, as well as staked down to keep any critters out. Apart from a couple of flies and 1 or 2 spiders, it did the trick. At the time, I was doing freelance handyman/repair work during the day and building our house in the evenings. And on the day of this incident, I was finishing up work on a house that had bad juju written all over it. I could feel the negative energy from the curb the first time I pulled up to the house to meet the owner, and walking through the door, the feeling intensified, but it wasn't absolutely overwhelming. And what can I say? We really needed the money. I had lost part of thumb a week earlier in an accident working on the house. I had an upcoming surgery to get it stitched up and to get the bone properly covered, and we didn't have insurance. Money was more than tight. Besides, I felt comfortable in my abilities to keep the negative energy at bay while I did whatever work had to be done and get the hell out of there. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. After a couple of weeks of working there, by the way, no one was living there at the time, the regular things that you would expect to happen in a high-energy place happened. Lights flipping back on right after I would turn them off, doors slamming shut behind me while I'm walking down the hallway, or opening for me as I'm reaching for them, the kind of stuff that's pretty much just meant to get a rise out of you. And the more I played it cool, the more intense it got. Eventually, I get to the last day. When over the phone the owner hinted at stiffing me for the bill, and I was packing up all my gear, I guess it was evident that I wasn't planning on coming back because the activity in the house was extremely low, virtually non-existent, except for the same dense negative energy that was always there. But now more than ever, I felt like I was being watched. Not just watched, but stared at like something was focusing on me with everything it had. Everything up until this point had been weird, but it was only your everyday kind of weird, the kind of weird that people who don't want to accept it can still somehow find logical excuses for. They'll say there was a draft, faulty wiring, really big mice in the walls, etc. The next thing that happened was the first thing in the house that genuinely spooked me. As I walked through the living room to the front door to leave for good, tool bucket in hand, I passed the only hallway in the house on my right. As I looked down the hallway to double check that I had turned off all of the lights, I saw something I didn't want to believe. At the end of the hallway, about 20 to 30 feet away from me, sat a huge black dog. Its head was following me as I walked past the hallway. When I say huge, I mean massive, like my head would have fit inside of its mouth. Prior experience with manifestations like that have taught me to give it as little energy as possible, and that you're better off acting like you hadn't noticed it. So, I continued to walk calmly to the front door, even though every hair on my body was standing on end and my adrenaline was racing. I stopped at the front door inside the house, turned around and addressed the house and everything within it, stating that as I left the house, nothing was welcome to follow me. I drove home, and that was that. I didn't tell my wife because I didn't want to worry her. We had enough going on at the time without bringing up things that I felt I had already addressed. So fast forward to later that night. My wife and I are fast asleep in bed. I'm torn out of sleep by my wife's terrified gasp, and being in a canvas tent in the middle of nowhere, I was already on edge. In the first split second of being awake, I see my wife sitting upright in our bed, still in the process of gasping, while our dog, who had been sleeping next to her, ran, barking and snarling like a lunatic, and jumped off the base of the bed, between us and the door. I still hadn't seen what was terrifying them, but leapt out of the bed while shouting at our dog bed, "Good dog, he's a little guy, and his job was to let me know about the boogeyman, not to fight it himself," and landed between the dog and the entrance to our tent. The entrance, which was not only still zipped up and buckled up tight, but staked to the ground in multiple places as well, as I did every night. As my feet hit the ground, I stood almost face to face with a massive black dog. It was sitting in front of the doorway, and as I landed and looked in the eyes, I was filled nothing short of absolute rage. I love my wife with all of my heart, and here was something dangerous that wasn't welcome in our home, watching us sleep. Immediately, I stepped forward and shouted at it, deep and loud, "Get out!" As I did, so this thing stands up and steps towards me, and I shout again, this time clapping my hands together as hard and loud as I can, while stepping forwards again. Again, this unbelievably massive dog, which is almost face to face with me height-wise, steps forward. At this point, we're maybe 4 feet away from each other. It hasn't ran off, and it's clear that this thing could easily kill us both if I let it. I lunge forward and come down as hard as I can with my right fist, aiming to kill it, aiming between the snout and right below the eyes. And just like that, ready to get torn to ribbons by this thing, I go right through it, and it's just gone. I'm completely shocked and spin around to see if somehow it slipped past me to my wife and dog, then unzip the very bottom of the front of her home, rip the stakes from the earth, and run a few steps out into the night, looking every direction for the thing. The moon is out, and I've got excellent night vision, but I can't see any sign of it. Nothing moving, no footsteps by the dark. I can't smell it, nothing. So after a minute, I run back inside to make sure my wife is okay. She's still sitting straight up in bed, eyes wide open, but she's okay, and the dog is tense as hell. I finally felt my thumb screaming in pain and pouring blood at this point. The bone was still exposed, waiting for surgery, and the heavy bandage had gotten knocked at some point. My heart rate is calming down, and I asked her what she saw while I'm trying to stop the bleeding again with paper towels. Now, we're both extremely logical people despite all of the weird we've seen. No matter how much paranormal stuff that you've seen, you can't fall down a rabbit hole. And it's still safe to assume that the vast majority of the weird theming you experience can be explained logically. That's the way that we both view it. But when I asked her what she saw, before telling her what I saw, she looked me dead in the eyes and said that it looked like a werewolf was sitting in our doorway watching us. I don't believe in werewolves, but I know for a fact that we both individually identified an unbelievably massive canine in our home, 10 feet from the foot of our bed, and we both saw it vanish into thin air. I know our dog saw something that he identified as a threat. There were no tracks anywhere around our tent the next morning. I looked as soon as the sun came up. Even if there had been tracks, we live in the middle of nowhere in the desert. There are no wolves. There are occasionally stray dogs and coyotes, but everything is on the small side. The only description that has consistently came to my mind since then has been hellhound, but I can't seem to find any similar stories online. Anyone with any thoughts, feel free to chime in, and I'll answer any questions I can. Sorry this is so long. I had to get all out there. Fourth story. I used to be stalked by a dog-like creature. Ever since I was a baby, I was a magnet to the paranormal. Ghosts, demons, and whatever is in the middle. I would always feel something watching me 24/7. I don't know when it started, but sometime around being 6 years old. I had 2 dogs at the time and would, of course, let them out whenever I was home from school and during the night. It was all normal till I started seeing this thing in the back corner of my backyard every single night. It was pretty large and looked like my dog, but it would just stand there and stare at me with glowing red eyes. It had the form of a large dog, almost coyote-like. And every night when I took my dogs out, it would be there, watching me. It filled me with so much terror and dread whenever I saw it. I would be frozen in fear. It was so bad that I wouldn't take my dogs outside alone anymore. I tried showing my dad and pointing at it. Yet on his end, he saw nothing. Him nor my mom believed me, which drove me crazy. It terrified my younger self due to the eerie resemblance of it to my, at the time, current dog. I could see its facial expressions, body, and the angle it would move. Sometimes the thing would even pace around in the corner of my yard, but it never left that spot, and I only ever saw it at night. During the day, it would disappear. It would stare at me even through the windows/blinds, as if it knew exactly where and when I was going to see it. This all repeated for years, might I add, all the way till intermediate school, 5th grade. I should also add that my dogs never seemed to react to it. Now that I'm older, I have barely seen it, but I wanted to ask if anyone had an idea on what this was. This dog-like thing terrorized me throughout my childhood, and I really want to know what it was. 5th story. DOGMAN finds the elk bone whistle. When the moonlight is as bright as a full moon and her little sister together, like dawn at midnight, in a land that knows the deepest wells of darkness that is howling night. I was learning the music of the forest at the time, searching for the song. If it was there all along, my shadow wouldn't be so pale. I'd still be understood by the others. Walking home, I could hear the sound in the trees, the grass. Each bird calls like an instrument. I am talking, of course, about the song. It is in all things. If you listen carefully, there is a rhythm, a kind of music. It pipes, it calls, it pulls you further than the horizon you can see. Then suddenly it was gone. Silence. I cannot fear anything more than something that silences the song. Across the road was a scattered mess of broken crates and wooden boxes. There were tire marks in an odd pattern, like someone had stopped, accelerated, then swerved and hit the brakes at the same time. It's what it looked like. I looked around, realizing that I could actually see silent cicadas. Such creatures never fell silent. They lived for the song, arriving just for their mass solo. With such a beautiful and esteemed part of the song, why would they fall silent? I clapped once loudly, and that seemed to set things back in motion, slowly, starting with the tenacious opera of the cicadas and with a few of their backups on the edges, but a quiet sort of sound in the swamps. I left the scene of the road, feeling warned by the break in the song. I shivered, the premonition bothering me. I took out my wooden flute and trilled a radius. With such a cheerful chirp, the swamp camp alive, and everything forgot its concentration and relaxed into the song. With the spirits dancing freely, I almost forgot the coldness I had felt, the moment of terror creeping in on the edges of my mind. The helicopter overhead shone a light on me as I walked the old road and then went out over the swamp somewhere. I worried they might be ATF and hurried along to Uncle Veldemont's shack. His blue soul lantern was glowing lazily, and the sound of his mouth harp was bouncing across the Black Mirror waters. No ATF raids tonight, so I relaxed. I greeted him with a mocking tone from my flute, and the timbre of his instrument went from annoyed to overjoyed in one hit. He had a jug of cranberry moonshine over his arm, finger through the loop poetically. He was savoring the pull, rinsing his mouth like a catfish. "You gonna share that juice?" I asked him. His eyes smiled while his beard dripped stupidly. "Still's out. Thought you'd bring back my all-purpose nice and sharp. All you brought was your sour music," Uncle Veldemont said with his heavy accent. Where he learned to talk is a mystery. The haft broke. "I'll fix it," I swore, twirling my flute in one hand and my other hand raised in promise. "Haft of oak just up and broke?" Uncle Veldemont didn't believe me, or I lost the head when I swung it up and over. It arched into the pond. I reached for the moonshine and got my hand whapped. "I'll arch you into the pond if you show up without it again, and you get to help me play catch up on the woodpile when you do." Uncle Veldemont nodded at the dwindling wood for the still. "Give me a reason to visit." I complained. "So I don't come find you," Uncle Veldemont offered. "Seems like a good reason." I agreed, worried he would. "I found something out on the road. Big mess." I changed the subject. "Heard gunshots and dogmen getting in a fight." Uncle Veldemont told me, "You best be staying until morning." "I'll not stay until morning. I'm not scared," I said. I had forgotten the feelings of terror from earlier. My amnesia was cured instantly when I was walking home later, humming loudly to myself when I realized the swamps had again forgotten the lyrics to the forest song. Terror gripped me, as nothing could possibly frighten me more than something that could take away all the music. My soul is very young. I was only ever there when they made the elk-bone whistle. You might call it a dream, but only because you do not have the word, or rather I cannot give you the word, because I don't know the word for it. Whatever it is, I am still there, even when I'm eating my Fruit Loops. I can hear it in the early dawn, a phantom piping. It calls from the mist between the night and the morning, a sound like the relief of the sunrise. The call that all is well, the first song. I'm not done much, but I did that, and it is all that matters to me. Something was in the swamps. Something had the elk-bone whistle. I stared into the swamps for a long time, and I knew the swamps were looking back at me. There was a sound, the cicadas and their friends, but there was no music. Dread filled me. Horror crept up like mud between my toes. It sucked at me, taking the light from my eyes, slowing my quickness to laughter, pulling my essence like cranberry moonshine into the hog's lips. It was the mud, it was the hog lips, and it was the eyes in the darkness, the staring predatory eyes of the angry thing that should not be. Then there was its growl, a resonance of malevolence. It was anti-music, a sound of betrayal and pain and disharmonious vibrations. It was hungry and pure evil, rising before me in the swamp. Dogman. I recognized the monster. My eyes refused to see more than a shadow. My nostrils refused to recognize the rot and the musk of the beast's fetid mat of skin. The shimmer of its claws, ripples of its massive muscles, and the thickness of its canine neck bore out the uncanny resemblance to a giant man. No man had the face of fangs and the eyes of black ink that this one had. And then my soul withered as it rent the air with its split voice. It raised its jaws, opened, and bellowed a klaxon, a whine, a howl so perversely deep and unnatural that for a moment I thought I would be run down by a bullet train. The red wave of the noise knocked me into the brackish waters, and the beast tore around me in a circle, splashing and crashing through the swamp in a rampage. Trembling, I crawled out of the leech-infested water back onto the road. The headlights of a truck on the highway above lit up the scene for a second, like a lightning flash. DOGMAN stood, dripping and panting, ready to destroy the trespasser. ID always understood the deeper Malay's bogs to be his home, but he was here on my path, in my song, in my story, ready to end my young life. I realized whatever had happened earlier, with the wreck, possibly the helicopter, any of it could be related. My mind raced weirdly, trying to come to terms with getting killed by a towering dog in the middle of the swamp in the early hours under the supermoon. It was better than thinking of the elk's cry, how its breath, its final breath, the sound of its voice could actually be seen with your eyes. The elk exhales as a mist, a fog of living vapor, and in this phantom cloud, the voice of the elk as part of the song. A swan song. Holding my wooden flute, I tried to take back the song that DOGMAN had robbed me of. I played fiercely and DOGMAN stood, his breath a rancorous and vampiric mist, choking me and stealing my energy. I gasped on his toxic dog breath, and try not to think about all the things that dogs like to lick to get their breath so stanky. As DOGMAN's monster tongue flicked out slowly, I turned away, Sigourney Weaver style. DOGMAN licked my cheek in a horror monster's kiss, and I shuddered, repulsed and horrified, trying to suppress my final girl scream. If I belted out my terror at his salivations, he'd bite my head clean off. As DOGMAN stood back up, I played on my flute, calming the monster. When the beast was soothed, it wandered away. From deep within the swamps, the place where he belonged, DOGMAN called back, the mournful howl at peace. The next day, there were reports all across the county on the public broadcast and on the radio. DOGMAN's rampage had cost millions in insurance, as he had destroyed vehicles parked near the swamp. His appetite for tearing apart and biting cars was quirky, and I doubted half the stories were true. People around here can get insurance from damage caused by wildlife. Clever insurance saleswomen, known as the twins, keep pointing out that there is no evidence of an animal. The insurance doesn't cover cryptids, unfortunately. I asked Uncle Veldemont about it, and he says the ATF made him in a lab. I don't think that story is true. Wearing tin foil hats on the supermoon won't help anyone's insurance premiums. You can still try. DOGMAN is still out there, but the search continues for those guilty of dumping in Malay's bogs. DOGMAN was blamed for the death of Tom Bracken, but he was really mixed up with the same mafia that dumps the toxic waste out there. Bigger fish to fry, Tom might have said, if he hadn't tripped and fallen backwards on a 16 low-caliber bullets out there one night. He didn't trip. DOGMAN pushed him. Even Uncle Veldemont has become paranoid, if that's what I should call his barbed wire still and the Gatling gun he built in his garage. He wears the tinfoil hat so people will think he is crazy and leave him alone. That makes sense. DOGMAN is out there, but the truth is something we will never know. Sixth story. If you ever see a black dog in the forests of Scotland, don't look it in the eyes. My name is David. I'm from Texarkana, a town in Arkansas. March 17th, the second stimulus check hit. Because some travel restrictions were lifted, I wanted to visit Scotland and go to Loch Ness. I wanted to check out Nessie for myself. I bought a round-trip ticket with United Airlines for 5% off. After arriving in Scotland, I visited a few places and checked into the hotel. After a while, I eventually went to Loch Ness. After waiting for 2 hours and no sign of Nessie, I decided to go back to the hotel and sleep for the night, which was only 6 p.m. at the time. I woke up 12 hours later, at 6 a.m., and realized how early it was. So I decided to hike along a forest trail until I had to go to the airport for my flight back home. After hiking for what was about an hour and a half, I heard a howl. It was foggy at the time, so I assumed it was a wolf trying to find his pack. But then I saw a black shadow. It looked like a wolf. I thought it was the one I heard, so I stepped back trying not to startle it. But it looked at me. and I looked back at it. Glowing red eyes pierced the fog, and I ran to the city for the next 30 minutes, checking if it followed me every step of the way. I found my car and almost got arrested for speeding back to the hotel, and I checked out immediately afterwards, saying it was an emergency. I drove to the airport, even if the flight was 2 hours away. After getting on the flight, I heard the pilot say over the speaker that we were experiencing a delay in takeoff. After 4 hours, the plane took off. I was anxious, but I didn't know why. When we arrived at the Clinton National Airport without the plane crashing, I was relieved, to say the least. I began to head towards Fort Smith and go to a place called Ed Walker's. Near Towson Avenue, my rental car was totaled by an oncoming semi. The fireman had to use the jaws of life and pulled me out of the car. I had broken my left femur and left shoulder. I mentioned to one of the paramedics on the ambulance I was coming back from a trip to Scotland. I didn't think much about it, but then the paramedic jokingly asked if I saw a black dog. I said no, but then I said I saw the shadow of a wolf with red eyes. The paramedic went dead silent. He murmured something about a black shuck. After arriving at a hospital called Baptist Health, 2 hours later my phone was delivered to me by an officer who recovered it from the totaled rental car. It was cracked as to be expected, but still usable. I thought about calling my mom, but figured the hospital already called her when I filled out her number on a form given to me earlier. I Googled black shuck on my phone because of what the paramedics said. To my surprise, it was described as a shadowy dog or silhouette of a dog with red eyes, and said if you looked into its eyes, you could be cursed with bad luck, or worse. I guess I should be thankful for being alive to write this story. As of right now, I'm still at the Baptist Health Hospital. 7th story. My friend's encounter with a dogman. A few months back, one of my friends opened up to me about a creature he said he encountered 2 times around New Jersey, where my mother lives. This same friend and I have encountered a skinwalker in the past while being in New Jersey, and he told me when he was just a boy he saw something in the fields next to his house. Whatever he saw still terrifies him to this day. He's had 2 encounters with this creature, one in the middle of the day when he was a boy, and one waking up in the middle of the night. Here are his encounters with an alleged dogman. These stories are also from his perspective, so I could capture that narrative feel. I hope you enjoy his stories. Hi, my name is Ted, and I've lived in New Jersey all my life. Since I was a kid, I've had all sorts of paranormal and creature experiences for a long time, which I can also tell here in the future at some point. I'm a heavy believer in the supernatural and in dogmen and cryptids, just like my friend Sam here. Here are 2 of my encounters with what I think are dogmen. It was a clear sunny day as I was walking alongside a trail that was close to my house. I was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time. It was so beautiful out that day, and as a young kid, I was taking it all in. I was having an adventure. Picture myself just running through the open fields waiting for Mom and Dad to get home. The trail I was on had beautiful scenery all around, with tall grass and miles of field to my left and dense forest to my right. I was just walking through the woods, as whenever my parents weren't home, that's what I used to do. I was enjoying the walk, taking in all the feels of nature. The smell of the woods was intoxicating as well as the chirping birds. Then the woods fell silent. I felt like someone or something was watching me, and my eyes darted around the entire area. I then looked to my left and noticed something in the tall grass. To me, it looked like a big dog, but then I saw it was crouched down like a man would be if he were hiding. It was covered in brown fur, looked like it had a muzzle and ears like a German shepherd, and had eyes that were blood red. I thought it was more curious than frightening to me, but I was still on edge. I was scared for a bit, but I acted like I didn't notice it and just went along my day and ran back to my house. I never spoke about this encounter with any of my family, as they would think I'm crazy, but that was my first encounter with what I think was a dogman. The second encounter only happened about 4 to 5 years ago. At this point, I lived in a different house. This house was close to a large forest, and the biggest predators I've seen around here have been either coyotes or foxes. Now what I saw that night was no coyote. I woke up in the middle of the night with my throat dry and realized I was thirsty. I went to the kitchen to get some water when I felt a sudden sense of dread and felt like I was being watched. I looked into the window close to where I was, and to my horror, I saw this huge animal in my backyard. Whatever it was noticed me, and it was staring at me with these crimson red eyes. I felt utterly terrified, and to my horror, I saw the animal bare its teeth at me and stand up on two legs. This creature then started growling, and I could hear it as my window was opened slightly. I also saw its breath come out of its mouth, and I realized that this was a real animal. It looked to be about 7 to 8 foot tall on both legs, with a head a German shepherd and a body shaped like a bodybuilder. Whatever it was then looked at the fence in my yard, ran to it, and jumped across it into the woods below. I went back to my bed, terrified and couldn't sleep at all that night. These two encounters with these beings have shook me to the core and made me realize that there are creatures that science refuses to recognize. 8th story, the Michigan Dogman. I've always been fascinated by urban legends and tales of supernatural creatures. I've heard of the Dogman since I was young, when I first heard the legend played on the radio. A mysterious creature said to roam the forests of the Great Lakes region, and with my fascination came a sense of wanting to find the creature and to see for myself if it was really out there. Armed with a curious mind and a flashlight, I set out to explore the woods near my hometown. It was an overcast night, with only the dim glow of the stars to guide my path. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent shivers down my spine. But I pressed on, my curiosity overpowering my unease. Little did I know how much of a mistake it was to ignore my instincts. After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled forward. An eerie silence blanketed the forest, as if a switch was flipped and all the sound in the world disappeared. Something drew me toward it, an invisible force urging me to step closer. That's when I surveyed my surroundings in detail and saw it. A pair of glowing amber eyes staring back at me from the shadows. My heart skipped a beat as the creature revealed itself, a massive canine-like figure, standing upright on two legs. Its fur was matted and dark, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. It was a dogman, and it had fixed its gaze upon me. A primal fear surged through my veins, and I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight in the process, and with but a moment's hesitation, I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded behind me, growing louder and closer with each passing second. I could hear its snarls and the sharp snapping of its jaws, hungry for the chase. My breath grew ragged, and my muscles screamed in protest, but the adrenaline fueled my desperate sprint. Branches whipped against my face, and the forest floor seemed to rise up to trip me. But I pushed through, determined to escape the clutches of the monstrous dogman. My lungs burned, and my vision blurred as I reached the edge of the woods. My house stood just a few yards away, its lights providing a beacon of hope. Summoning the last reserves of my strength, I sprinted across the yard and flung open the front door. I slammed it shut, panting heavily as I leaned against it, my heart racing in my chest. I felt a mixture of relief and terror as I looked through the window and saw the dogman standing at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed upon me. Its mouth curled into a wicked snarl, revealing sharp, glistening teeth, and what looked like a cruel and deranged smile. For a moment, we locked eyes, a battle of wills between human and beast. I knew that I had escaped, but the encounter had left an indelible mark on my soul. The dogman had shown me the darkness lurking just beyond the realm of our understanding, and it was a sight I would never forget. To this day, I am plagued by the memory of that night. The image of the dogman's glowing eyes and sinister grin haunts my dreams, a constant reminder of the terrors that exist in the shadows. I warn anyone who dares to venture into the Michigan wilderness, beware the dogman's domain. It may be an urban legend to some, but for those who have encountered its malevolence, it is all too real. The forest hides its secrets well, and the dogman waits patiently for its next victim. Ever since then, I haven't been able to look at the woods without a shudder going down my spine, hoping to not see the amber eyes staring back at me. If I were to give you all any advice, it would be, do not go out at night. Eighth story. Dogman encounter during camping trip. Hello, my name is Shaggy Satter, but you can call me Shaggy for short. I'm going to recant a story of mine that I tell rarely. My own family don't even know about this, and while that might sound weird to you, trust me, it makes more sense to tell internet strangers than the people I'm forced to be around. Mr. X Dreams, an amazing narrator, once read this story for his channel, and I'm happy with the discussion it got. But I believe it's time to rewrite the story to clear up confusions. So without further explanation, let me get into my story. This happened when I was much younger. I'd have to ask my parents when the camping trip happened to tell you how many years ago it was, but I can assure you it was at least a decade. Now I'm going to use some questionable words for describing the location. Words like wooded and wilderness reserve because I don't know the best word for this thing. Around a decade ago, a friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to a wilderness reserve called Oasis State Park. Of course, since this was my best friend and his family had always been nice, I said yes. Up until that point, I had only camped rarely. So the prospect of camping with a friend and his family seemed absolutely amazing. So we began preparing for a weekend when I wasn't busy. I got my own tent, my own sleeping bag, and my own supplies. Once all that was gathered, the father of the friend came and picked me up, and my parents waved me off. There are quite a few things I remember from that trip. The amazingly hostile yet beautiful New Mexico countryside, the plateaus, and the campsite. The New Mexican wilderness isn't something a lot of people fantasize about camping in, at least not so far as I know. But Oasis State Park is different. The camping plots are all nice, even if the best are always taken. There's a pretty lake, lots of wildlife, and I hate to admit, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yet I know nobody thinks of multitudes of trees when they think of New Mexico, and for good reason. They aren't the most common occurrence in the plains unless planted by people. Regardless, Oasis has enough for me to just use the term woods for the sake of brevity. So anyways, we found ourselves a plot and began setting up our tents. By afternoon, the tents were set, and me and my friend ditched his oh-so-boring younger sister in favor of exploring the park. The memories are fantastic. We found a snake by the lake and watched it drink from the water before slithering off quickly. We explored a place I remember was very sandy. We watched a roadrunner doing its thing. We played all day after lunch and saw so many amazing things that by the end of the day, I never would have thought anything could go wrong. We finished the day like you always do, by collecting sticks and starting a fire to eat s'mores and tell ghost stories. None of the stories were scary, probably because me and my friend were kids and his sister was an even younger child, and his father was lead singer at our church, and making children cry was bad for reputation. So by ghost stories, I mean little jokes of stories designed to make us giggle more than cry. Yeah, it was lame, but what do you expect? Anyways, shortly after the stories were said and s'mores were eaten, we retired, me to my tent, and my friend, his father, and his sister to their tent. Now for this setup, I'll explain positioning. This is all going to be important. My tent was at one edge of the plot, and my friend's tent was at the exact opposite. This was for privacy reasons. Now on my end of the plot was a mini trail that led through thick brush to the lake. Also about 3 feet from my tent was a little tree. What kind of tree it was, but it was still young and small. The trail to the lake was to the left of my tent entrance. The lake was behind it, and a thin tree line sat across a trail in front of my tent. That trail in front of my tent led to the bathrooms. So I went to bed without a single bit of fear, and before I did, I went ahead and urinated on the tree outside my tent because of laziness. Screw the 2-minute walk to the bathrooms when nature's toilet was outside my tent. So I finished closing on my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag to go to bed. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke I had to use the bathroom, and it wasn't the kind of pottying I could do on a tree, or at least not reasonably. So I, not being a moron who'd wander through the dark, grabbed my little lantern. I flipped on my LED lantern, and I unzipped the inner flap of my tent before the outer, as if that little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now I should mention that outside of cities in New Mexico, it's quite common to hear coyote howls. It's a nightly occurrence when camping. Heck, even up in a little village like Logan, you can hear the howls from your bedroom. It isn't so unnerving when you're in a house. But when you got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you, and that's it, well, it isn't the most comforting sound. As I unzipped my tent flap, I did hear a few howls, but they were distant and not worrying. What stunned me into stillness was a very loud howl from the direction of the lake, about a yard from my tent at most. This howl was different, though. It had the feel of a coyote howl, but it was deeper, and it lasted longer. I simply sat there petrified at what I heard. I wouldn't be able to guess at how long I sat there breathing hard with my fingers still grasping the zipper. But however long it may have been was just long enough for the thing that made that howl to come up the trail next to my tent. Suddenly, I heard the crunching of claws on dirt, and after that, claws on the rocks that made our camping plots. Then I saw the largest shadow made by a living creature that little kid me had ever seen. It lumbered heavily in the direction of the sparse tree line, where I assumed the other howling had come from. But before it got past the tree, I urinated on it stopped. I realized only then that I was both lit like a candle and had not been trying to silence my heaving breathing. By then it was too late, as that hulking thing lumbered over closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. As dim as the little LED light was at that distance, it was just barely enough to make out details. I like to note a few very important details that stuck out to me as odd. It had roughly the fur coloring of a coyote, but that classic dogman head shape with the tiny pointed ears too small to make sense. It also made strange noises as it lowered to all fours in front of my tent. Popping sounds like joints rubbing together, as I can only assume its knees busted out of their standing joints and fell into different joints to support all fours. It briefly ignored the very obviously frightened kid me in my tent as it sniffed the tree I had urinated on. The breaths were similar to a dog's, but longer and far deeper, almost like a horse's. Then that thing turned to me and stared straight into my eyes. Its eyes didn't glow. They didn't peer into my soul, but they were unbelievably unnatural. Above all the things I saw in those eyes, I saw a predator. Have you ever been in a position where you made eye contact with a beast you know is stronger than you? Something you know could just slaughter you, and you know it knows you know. Just looking for seemingly so damn long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain by the time anyone reached my tent. Screaming would do nothing. I doubted a gun would even hurt this thing. But despite every feeling in my gut, despite the dread of knowing it was predator and I was prey, I didn't die. Instead it turned, slowly, ever so slowly, and just sprinted off into the woods. Just gone into the night faster than it came. I have one personal friend who knows, and he jokes that maybe it was my piss on that tree. Like I marked my territory or something dumb like that. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry. Or most improbable, it had just enough morals to not kill a kid. I'll never really know. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom. I just put my lantern away, closed my tent flap, and held it all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I might have, I might not, but if I did, it was dreamless. I do remember that I tried to hide this experience the next day, asking if my friend and his family heard any howling. While they did hear the howling, they told me they just ignored it, thinking it was a coyote doing coyote stuff. I was encouraged to just ignore it as if I was a city kid who had never heard coyote howling before. That next day, I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch. Somehow the safety I'd been feeling during the day put the beast out of my mind, until we found tracks in that super sandy place. Coyote tracks. I think seeing those tracks confirmed to me that it wasn't just some dream, and because of that I showed enough fear that night to convince my friend's family to let me sleep in their tent. Even in the comfort of a warmer tent, more people means more warmth, and in the presence of an adult, the father, and two other people, friend and his sister, I couldn't sleep that night. I nearly drifted into sleep, and then I'd hear a coyote howl. The next day, I pretended to be sick and got my mother to drive up and take me home a day or too early. Worst camping trip of my life. It ruined not only my whole summer, but also ruined camping. I haven't been camping without a tent buddy since, and I don't plan to. Even then, I'm never comfortable, always listening for strange noises and acting paranoid. This really messed me up, I guess, being forced to see that a human top of the food chain is utterly powerless in front of such a beast. Seriously, I don't think I can press hard enough to make everyone realize how powerless I felt. Even today, when I think about this, I remember two things first. Those eyes and that feeling. Just writing this sent multiple shivers up my spine. That said, you might be asking why I'm talking about this again if it terrifies me so much. Simple. I both want answers, and I want to add to the conversation. I feel the need to add this encounter so that others can experience it, maybe contact me with questions or answers. So let me say now that if you have any idea what happened that night, please respond or DM. If you have any questions, go ahead and do the same. Ninth story. I don't think my dog is really a dog. I'm currently hiding in my closet, shaking in fear. I'm typing this out on my phone, so I'm sorry if there's a formatting issue or grammar, but I don't really give mine right now. In case I don't make an update to this post, please report this to the authorities or anyone, please. I don't know what to do. During April of 2018, I adopted a 5-month-old puppy from the pound. I was lucky enough to get her out of that hellhole and into my loving home. She was a border collie mix, and her name was Nellie. I don't know what happened to her, but what I have now is not my dog. She was a timid little pup when I first took her home. I remember she was inside for at least 5 minutes before she peed on the carpet. I could only laugh and kiss her because I was so happy. She slept in my bed that night, and for many more nights to come. She only weighed maybe 6 or 7 kilograms when I first picked her up. The months that followed were amazing. For the first time since I graduated high school, I was over the moon. Every day when I got home from work, she would rush to greet me with her lead dangling from her mouth, her tail wagging wildly. She absolutely loved to grab the newspaper from the mailbox with me. She was also an awesome chick magnet, but that's besides the point. She loved my neighbor, a nice man named Paul, whose wife had recently passed away from breast cancer. He was an older gentleman, well into his 50s, but never looked a day over 40. He liked to throw a barbecue for the few neighbors we had in our little rural community. He always made an effort, so we all returned the favor with bringing food and beer. Things began to change in December of 2018. In the early hours of the morning, on the 5th, I believe, Nellie woke me up. I grabbed my glasses from the bedside table and flicked on the lamp. She was stood about a meter from the door, pointing right at it. I could hear a low growl emanating from her. Curious, I got out of bed and opened the door. To her surprise, there was nothing there. I thought that would have been the end of it. A few more days pass, and on the 9th, it happened again, early hours of the morning and pointing at the door. This continued for the next week. I believe this is when Nellie disappeared. At about 2 a.m. on the 21st, Nellie woke me up and wanted to go outside. She would do this once every few weeks, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. She would wake me up by licking my face and then sulk and lay down in front of the door if I wouldn't get up. Behind my backyard is a forest that extends for miles. Sometimes Nellie liked to hunt down rabbits and possums when we would go for a walk through the woods. When I let her out that night, she walked to about 5 meters before the tree line. I watched her pee, and she started her way back to the house. This is when things didn't go exactly as planned. She must have heard something because she whipped around and pointed at the trees and growled. I thought it might have been a rabbit, but thinking back on it now, it was probably something much worse. She barked, then made a beeline for the trees. She disappeared into the thickness before I heard more barking. Then nothing. Absolute silence. I was about to grab a torch and put on my red bands, but then the trees started rustling. There was no wind. It was distressing to say the least. Then they stopped. I called out her name and waited. About a minute later, she wandered out of the trees and back inside. I thought nothing of it and promptly went back to sleep. I should have thought about it. As the months continued, things got weird. She stopped wanting to go on walks. She cut back on her food and began to get skinnier. I decided to change up her diet from dog biscuits to meat. She liked that. She really liked that. Sometimes she would run off into the woods to go hunting for rabbits or anything she could get her paws on. I also noticed she began to get bigger. Not fat bigger, because as she got bigger, it looked like she got skinnier. Then she stopped playing with her toys. That weirded me out the most, because her beloved squeaky duck toy I got for her the day she came home was always with her inside the house. Now it lay, gathering dust in the corner of my room. But she began to show a liking to the barbecue get-together Paul would throw. A little too much. Honestly, that should have been a warning sign. That day was the 26th of February, 2019. In the following weeks, people unfortunately died. It was small to begin with. That makes it sound better than it was. Old people died first. As sad as it sounded, we all thought it was because of old age. Then we got the details. Horrific details. They were murders, violent and bloody murders. We were absolutely shit scared then. Paul and I started communicating a lot more than we used to, a text every hour or so just to check in, or maybe a phone call or two. He told me I should keep the key for my gun safe in the lock in case of an emergency. I listened. I listened because I trusted him. I listened because he was one of my only friends. This brings us to tonight, the 24th of March. I awoke to the sound of gunfire. I rushed over to my curtains and yanked them open. Paul's house was on fire. I immediately rushed to put on some thick clothes and grabbed a flashlight and my phone ready to dial 111 for a fire truck. At the time, I didn't even notice my bedroom door was open when I clearly remember closing before I went to bed that night. Nor did I notice Nellie was missing. I yanked open my back door and I froze. It was illuminated by the bright fire of Paul's home. It stood on its hind legs, tall and lanky, completely black with white highlights over its body. The eyes were almost a glowing red. Its claws were massive, and sadly one set was clearly protruding through Paul's chest. I actually don't know. It felt like so long ago, even though it was only an hour ago. I couldn't feel a thing. I couldn't even feel the flashlight slip through my fingers and land heavily on the concrete ground of my back patio. I instantly realized my mistake, and I saw it look at me. It looked me deep in the eye, and I saw her. Her, my sweet girl, my Nellie. Or more rather, what was pretending to be Nellie. It dropped Paul to the ground and terrifyingly reared its head into the air and howled deeply. It sounded like a mix between the sound of absolute pain and what I could only describe as Lupin's howl from Prisoner of Azkaban. That was the only motivation I needed to run. I hauled ass into my bedroom and dived into my closet and shut the door. I covered myself in dirty washing and stayed still. It felt like I laid there for a few million years. It walked, or skulked more rather, into my room. I heard its claws clatter across the hardwood floor before stopping. I couldn't see a thing, but I heard it howl once again before it sounded like it tore my bed to bits. I heard glass smash and hard objects collide with the walls. Then nothing. Complete silence once again before I heard I skulk off and leave the house. Probably to finish eating my friend. It's now 7 a.m. I can hear sirens outside, but I'm too afraid to leave lest that thing is waiting for me on the other side of the door. The inky thing I could do for the last few hours was type this out and do research, but it didn't make sense. I Googled everything I remembered about that thing. I got a result that I'm fairly certain is what it is. It didn't make sense. I read pages upon pages of this thing, looked at artwork, folklore, everything. It doesn't make sense. The research says the location of the creature is found in the United States, usually on Native American land. 10th story. My life was saved by Dogman Hunter. I was heading back into town with my buddy Joe after spending the weekend out on a frozen lake, ice fishing, and drinking beer. The fish were really biting, too. Joe's SUV was stuffed to the gills with walleye and smallmouth bass. The northerly town of Kapuskasing was buried under a mountain of snow, the worst snowfall since the winter of '97. I've lived my entire life in northern Ontario, so I've seen my fair share of snow, but nothing like this. But you learn to expect the unexpected in northern Ontario. We were heading over a steep incline, enjoying a generous backdrop of pine trees painted in freshly fallen snow, when tragedy struck. We watched as two police helicopters landed on the small slice of highway, causing the trickles of traffic to grind to a halt. Not a good sign. This highway was the only road home. We later learned that a newlywed couple had collided with a transport truck, killing both the husband and wife. We were forced to turn around and head back over the hill, where we found ourselves driving through a modest-sized hamlet consisting of one stop sign, a gas station/motel/restaurant, plus a smattering of wartime houses. Except all you could see was the pointed rooftops. The houses were completely submerged in snow. It was an incredible sight, something you only see this far up north, and even then, this was rare. Joe didn't want to stick around, waiting a good 12 hours for the road to clear. He had a wife and kids to get home to, so we pulled over, wondering what our next move should be. Joe had that look in his eye, the look he gets when he's about to do something dangerous or stupid, or both. "I know this look well." "Hand tight," he said, "and hold on." We turned onto a crude version of a road, the kind designated for snowmobiles, with stop signs standing a mere 3 feet tall. The road was extremely narrow. Snowbanks as high as trees were towering over us like large, looming walls of white. If anything were to approach, we'd have nowhere to go. There wasn't enough room to turn around. I was becoming increasingly uneasy. This is how people get hurt. Or worse. "Are you sure this is safe?" I asked, hating the sound of my voice. Joe ignored me, or simply didn't hear me. He was busy white-knuckling the minivan through the snow-tunneled trail, the glare of the setting sun blinding us the entire time. We drove for 15 minutes, knifing our way along the icy road, which was bumpier than a wooden roller coaster. It was obvious that we shouldn't be here. The impending darkness didn't improve my mood one bit, either. I had a bad feeling about this. Joe stopped the van. "What's up?" I asked, not trusting the look on his face. Joe didn't answer. I could see his mind at work, assessing the direness of our situation. "I've got to turn this thing around somehow," he finally said. I couldn't see how this was possible, as we were sandwiched between two colossal snowbanks. Something flickered inside Joe's dark eyes. "What's that up ahead?" he asked, flashing on the high beams. "I think it's a road." It was. We edged a bit further, stopping at this makeshift road. There were no signs or road markings to be seen. Nothing. In fact, this road looked worse than the one we were on. "Let's see where it goes," Joe said, cranking the wheel. As the minivan lumbered down the unmarked road, an ominous feeling swept over me. It was impossible to ignore. We were in trouble. There was no denying it. We were completely off the grid. Not even Google Maps could save us. There was only one way to go, straight. The road was leading us into the dark of the forest, and when you're this far north, that's never a good idea, especially at night. That's when the wolves come out. It was looking to be a moonless night, which didn't help us one bit. Joe's hands were quivering as he clenched the wheel, keeping us from skidding into the towering snowbank. He kept assuring me we'd be all right, but I've heard that one before. Joe slammed on the brakes. "You see that?" He pointed. "Over there." I squinted my eyes. "Look," he said. "Fire." Deep into the forest, I spotted a small, flickering flame, dancing blue and orange and yellow and wild. Probably a campfire. Just then, a strange and disturbing sound crackled through the night like a howling wolf. "You hear that?" he asked. The animal cried out again. It was the loneliest yowl I'd ever heard. There it goes again. It sounded like a wolf, except it didn't sound like any wolf I'd heard before, and I've heard plenty. Whatever it was dangerously close. "Wolf?" I said nervously, but not believing it. As soon as those words left my mouth, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared out of nowhere. Joe stopped the car and killed the lights. "Be still," he said. I did just that. I sat motionless beside him in the car, but my hands were shaking. Those laser red eyes were approaching at an impossible speed. "Reach back and grab the gun," Joe whispered. I tried, but it was out of reach. They were on his side, closer to the back. Those glowing eyes flashed on and off, and for a moment everything was still. Then from out of nowhere, the beast lunged onto the hood of the van. "AHHHH!" we screamed in unison. The thing was huge, unlike any animal I'd ever seen. It looked like an overgrown German shepherd, except it was standing on its hind legs like a human. It was snarling at us, making ungodly noises, thrashing about. The creature was long and gangly, frothing at the mouth, clearly rabid. "Dogman," Joe said, clearly astonished. "I don't believe it." Joe gunned it, looking to run the thing over and speed away, but the wheels were caught on ice. Without warning, the beast leapt off the hood and started scratching at my door, its claws like daggers, tearing the door from its hinges. It smashed through the windshield, shattering it into a million pieces. With its dog-like face twisted in rage, the thing took a swipe at me. Its long, toothy claws just inches from ripping my eyeballs from their sockets. The SUV shook, spilling the cooler of dead fish. The smell was atrocious. The dogman disagreed. Before it could rip apart my throat with its curvy claws, the creature turned from me and trampled to the back of the van, where devouring the fish in seconds flat. Its muzzle turned blood red. Watching it lick the fish guts from its paws was sickening. This isn't how I wanted to die. The dogman's razor-sharp teeth were on full display. The insidious brute seemed hell-bent on killing us both. We were, in fact, the main course. It took a tentative step toward us, licking its filthy face. I gave Joe a look that said, "Nice knowing you, pal," when out of nowhere came an ear-ringing blast, striking the creature in the shoulder. The thing screamed in protest. Then came another shot, hitting the B square in the chest. Blood and gore spilled like wine across the interior of the SUV. "Someone's shooting at it," Joe proclaimed. 3 more shots rang out. The creature snarled, wiped the fleshy cartilage from its bloodied face, then attacked. Bang! The shot went wide, but it was enough to send the beast scurrying back into the woods. "Holy hell," Joe said in a shaky voice. Without a second thought, he pulled his seat back as far as it could go, then shimmied his way into the back of the van and grabbed the gun. "We're going to need this." All of a sudden, it was freezing. With the vehicle off and the windshield busted in, it was an igloo inside the van. "It's getting cold in here, eh?" I said, shaking uncontrollably. A large plume of steam escaped from my face as I spoke. I was in shock. I had no idea what that thing was, but it damn near killed me. The scene inside of the minivan was that out of a horror movie. The smell was even worse. I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. Joe tried his door with the same results. We were stuck. I'd sliced myself to shreds before I got halfway through my windshield. Joe's door had a bullet hole where the handle should be. We'd have to escape through the back. Blood and guts and fish bones and all. It was gruesome, but we did it. Once outside, I scanned the area, searching for that dog creature that almost killed me, but it had vanished. Joe's shotgun was aimed at a speck of light approaching from straight ahead. A car. Within minutes, we were greeted by a Volkswagen microbus. It stopped directly in front of us. The driver got out and ran toward us carrying a sniper rifle, wearing a belt of ammunition. He spoke fast and with purpose, checking his surrounding while doing so. "You saw it? You did, didn't you? Excellent. Which way to go, by the way?" This guy made Clint Eastwood look like a Boy Scout. I honestly thought he was going to kill us. He frowned as he surveyed the scene. Then he shrugged. "I suppose you'll be needing my help." He ran to the bus and opened up the hatch, exposing an array of military-style weapons to the likes I'd only seen in the movies. "Holy hell," Joe said, clearly impressed. I remained quiet, unsure what to make of this heavily armed, red-headed stranger who literally just appeared out of nowhere to save our lives. But there seemed to be no other choice. Whoever he was, he drove us back to his cottage, regaling us with the history of this dogman creature. He told us some pretty tall tales. His name was Patrick. Apparently, he's a dogman hunter. He says he's never captured one, but claims to have seen 4 or 5, wounding 2 of them. "Pesky bastards," he says. "Hard to kill." He'd been hunting the one that attacked us for weeks. Apparently, It's been mutilating deer and coyotes, as well as regular cats and dogs all winter long, leaving their salvaged remains scattered along the sides of the road and in people's backyards. The locals were starting to panic. Joe and I texted home, then we stayed up all night talking about Dogman. I was having a hard time coming to grips with all this, seeing as how I almost died at the hands of one of them. Joe, on the other hand, was enthralled. The next day, we drove back to the SUV to inspect the damage. When we arrived, the van was completely dismantled and destroyed. It lay in ruins. Everything inside it had been ravaged and plundered. "This isn't right," Patrick said. "There must be an explanation." We scanned the surrounding area for over an hour and came up empty-handed. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, making track finding next to impossible. The disappointment on Patrick's face was palpable. Reluctantly, we hopped into his microbus and he drove us home with our tails between our legs, where we arrived a day late and short one SUV. We stayed in touch with Patrick going forward. Joe, coming from a long lineage of seasoned hunters, was intrigued by this dogman creature. Naturally, I was skeptical. I'm fairly certain that beast meant to eat me. The last thing I wanted to do was volunteer to go searching for it. Yet, unbeknownst to me, this was the making of a team of hunters, dogman hunters. Still, amidst all the excitement, a feeling of trepidation had stolen over me. There was lesson to be learned from all of this, a lesson lost on my gun-toting counterparts. Some roads are best untraveled, especially in Northern Ontario, where anything can happen and usually does. 11th story. I used to walk dogs. My name is Wyatt, and I need to get this out. A few years back, I got a job advertisement. Animal care assistant, no experience required. Being fresh out of college with minimal job prospects, I thought this would be a perfect chance. Ever since I was a kid, I cared for animals. Cooper, our golden retriever, was my best friend. We got him when I was 9 for the next decade. We were practically inseparable. However, when I was getting ready to go to college, Cooper was diagnosed with hemangiosarcoma, a very common dog cancer. I was heartbroken, and I refused to let him go alone. When they put him to sleep, I refused to leave him alone. I practically had to grapple with my dad to not make me leave him. But I stayed. I looked him in the eyes as the vet gave him the sedative to help him stop squirming as they put him down. I kept his ashes in a little locket, which I pinned to my backpack all through college. It felt as if he was there dutifully walking beside me through the labors of academia. But when I saw the ad, I put in the application and got a call. A gruff man's voice asked, "Is this Mr. Kelly?" "Yes," I responded. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m., I've emailed you the address of the shelter. We want you to get to know the rest of the staff. Before you start," the voice curtly ordered. Before I could respond, the voice hung up. So I guess this guy was to be my boss. The next day, I took the bus to the big concrete building at the edge of town. St. Francis Shelter. I thought that name was kind of weird. Don't they usually name hospitals after saints? I pulled my bag up on my shoulders, hearing the charm with Cooper in a jingle. I took a deep breath and opened the doors to the shelter. A thin woman behind the desk in the spacious lobby stood from her chair and greeted me. "Hello, there, welcome to St. Francis. Can I ask what brings you in today?" The woman who, based on her name tag, was named Margaret. "Oh, hi, my name is Wyatt. Man called me yesterday to ask me to come in for the new position," I said, but before I could continue, the woman cut me off. "Oh yeah, the major is in the locker room, but I'll give you a tour of the facility," Margaret cheerily said. "Major?" I asked. "The major, he's one of the people who manage the facility. Most of the staff are veterans," Margaret said, after leading me through a bunch of rooms and corridors of white-painted concrete. Then we entered the kennel. Rows and rows of cages, some of them stacked on top of each other. It looked like one of those commercials you'd see. They looked at me so sadly. And that's when I finally crystallized the main question I had. There are no other animals, just dogs. Usually, animal shelters have a mix of animals, but this was just dogs. But I walked past the kennel, and that's when I noticed another odd thing. The dogs were all big. No Shih Tzus or pugs. The smallest thing I saw was some big pit mix. And they all looked like rescues. Most of them had scars, bruises, ripped ears. A few were missing eyes. They all looked right out of one of those commercials where you see all the sad animals and then the shelter begs you for money. The major likes to take in dogs that have the least chance of adoption. We try to make them healthy and comfortable even if they don't have anywhere to go, Margaret said as she seemed to notice my confusion. My guess he just sees himself in them, she continued as she opened the other steel door at the end of the kennel. That led to a T-shaped split in the hallway. At one end was a set of wooden double doors, and on the other end was a locked-up metal door. It looked more like a bank vault door, with heavy metal locks and a swipe card slot. That's the secure section. It's where we keep paperwork and records, Margaret said as she led me to the big set of doors. I looked up at the plaque on the door, and it read, "Quiet room, please be respectful. L." I suddenly was taken back to a similar sign I saw in the vet where I said goodbye to my best friend. As we began to open the doors, I heard a loud click and slam as the secure section door slammed shut. "Hey, Marge, this the new guy?" a voice from behind exclaimed. I turned around to be met with a man a few years older than me, maybe 28. "Hi, my name's Wyatt. Who are you?" I asked, reaching out my hand. "I'm Will said as he walked up and shook my hand. "Hey, well, let's talk later. Time to go bring Wyatt to meet the major," Margaret said as she gently began leading me back down the hall back to the kennel. Margaret led me back through the kennel to the lobby where a tall, bald, muscular man, maybe in his 50s, stood leaning against the counter. Once he turned to face me and I got a better look at him, I noticed something odd. He was covered in scars, cuts across his face, and burn marks on his arm. I tried my best not to stare, but it was grisly, to say the least. "Hello, young man, my name is David Marster, but most people call me Major," the major said as he looked me up and down. "Yes, sir, my name is—" The major cut me off. "Wyatt," the major said as he picked up a clipboard and a pen. "Sir, may I ask what my responsibilities would be if I worked here?" I asked. "Well, Wyatt, you'll be our new dog walker," the major said as he pushed me the clipboard and pen. I looked the paper up and down. It was an employee contract. At the bottom, there was a spot for me to sign. With a quick flick of a wrist, I sold my soul. The major filled me in on my job. With just how many dogs they have here, they need someone to take them out daily. So I take the dogs in groups of 2 to 4 and walk around town. Specifically, the major requested I take the old and sick dogs into the woods behind the shelter and walk them around the lake so they could get a last moment of glory before being put to sleep. It was so odd the dogs always pulled and tugged as I walked them. There was this big, mean-looking pit named Gage who would always seem to stop and look at this same building every time. An old-style blue house not far from the shelter. He didn't even run or try to run. He would just sit and stare up at the house, his pure, massive body weight slowing me down as I pulled, and eventually, after coaxing, he would eventually get up and with a little less pep in his step would walk along with me. A lot of the dogs had odd behaviors like that they'd randomly stop and stare at places and people. It was weird. It wasn't like they suddenly wanted to run off. But if I had that Great Dane Gary and we'd walk past the restaurant downtown, he would stop playing himself and not move until I practically dragged him to his feet. The first odd experience I had was one time I finished my last rounds, took the dogs back to their cages, and began locking them up. As I was finishing lockup, I heard the squeal of rubber in the parking lot. I put the last of my group, a German shepherd named Harvey, and walked out to the lobby to see what was going on. A group of about 6 big pickup trucks pulled into the parking lot, not seeming to care about the lines painted on the asphalt. Out of the trucks came about a dozen tall, burly men dressed in all black. Most of them were in what looked like surplus clothes, and they all carried heavy duffel bags slung over their shoulder. The major walked past me and went to greet the men. Before he walked out the door, I asked, "Who are those guys?" "Night shift." The major calmly responded as he went out to greet them. The night shift guys were odd. They spoke very little, and the minimum they did say would mostly consist of them telling you to get out of their way. They only seemed to have any friendly conversation with each other and the major. That was another odd thing I picked up on. Did the major live here? He never seemed to leave. I'd come in for work at 9 in the morning, and he'd already be here. Then when I'd be getting ready to go at 5 and the night shift staff was coming in, he would stay with them. I never once saw him outside of the shelter. Maybe he was just incredibly dedicated. That's at least what I thought then. One time, I asked the major, "Why do you have so much more staff at night than during the day? The dogs can be more easily spooked at night. It's good to have some more people there." The major curtly responded, "But that was my life. Keep your eyes down, do what the major said, walk the dogs. Get paid." The pay was pretty good in all honesty. Looking back on it of experiences, I should have probably paid more attention to. One time I was walking Gage the pit when we passed the house. He, as per usual, stopped sat and didn't want to move. "Oh, come on, Gage, not this again," I pleaded as I pulled on his leash. That's when the door opened. A woman about my age walked out the front door, tapping on her phone. That's when Gage went ballistic. He didn't bark, but he pulled and pulled like he wanted to get closer to her. She looked up from her phone and saw me feebly pulling on his lead, trying to get him to go further down the street. "Oh, who's this?" she said as she walked over to pet Gage. "This is Gage. Sorry about him. He must like you," I said as Gage nuzzled her hand and sniffed her. "Oh, it's no issue," she said as she scratched behind Gage's ears to his delight. "I'm sorry, my name is Wyatt," I said as I attempted to reach out a hand as all the dogs pulled in different directions. "Sandra," she said as she managed to shake my struggling hand. "Well, I better get back to work. Sorry about him again," I said as I began to walk off. Gage was not having any of this. He did not want to go. He started yowling and barking like someone was trying to kill him. As Sandra walked away, he eventually caved and followed me. I stopped and kneeled to him. "Hey, buddy, look, we'll try to stop here again, if she is here, but I need you to work with me. Can you do that, big guy?" I said as I rubbed behind his ears. As we were walking away, I swear I heard something from behind me, like someone whispering into the wind as it passed by your ear. I looked back, but all I saw was Gage staring at me as he slowly trotted along. I had just finished my walks, and I was putting the dogs back in their cages, when I heard a shout from down the hall, like a panic scream. I ran in case someone was hurt, but it was so bizarre I didn't recognize the voice anywhere. "Please no, please don't hurt me," the voice pleaded before seemingly morphing into a sound that sounded like one part begging and one part whining. I went into the split, and it was coming from the quiet room. I walked up and tried the handle, but it was locked. A few more moments of grunting and moaning before Will and the major pushed out of the room, and Will held a bloody rag over his arm. "Well, did you get bit?" the major barked at him. "No, he just scratched me," Will pleaded. I looked past them to see the unmoving body of a German shepherd hunter laying his eyes pointed towards the door, seemingly looking at me. "Well, don't lie to me. Did you get bit?" the major said as he slammed Will against the wall. Will looked down away from the major. Wordlessly, the major grabbed him and led him towards the security door. As I walked behind them, my mind swam with questions. First of which was, who was that? It wasn't Will or the major. The voice sounded weak and pathetic, as if it was groveling. "So what's going on? Should I get first aid?" I went to ask before I was sharply cut off by the major. "Wyatt, stay back. Will might be sick," the major ordered. "Okay, sir, should I dial 911? I asked as I took a step back. "And oh, just wait here," the major said as he pushed Will through the security door. I looked past them to see into the secure room. That's the thing, though, there wasn't a room, it was just a stairwell. Leading down, Will flew forward, tripping over himself and falling at the top of the stairs. The major looked at me with a paternal demand, and then threw the heavy security door shut with an unexpected strength. I stood there frozen. I didn't know what to do. I slowly backed away from the door and went back to the kennel. As soon as I opened the doors, the dog all looked at me. It was bizarre. It was as if they were privy to something I wasn't. The usual barks and huffs I'd hear, expecting walks or treats or anything. They just stood and followed me with their gaze as I walked down the hall. As I opened the door to walk out to the lobby, I heard something behind me. "Help us." The voice sounded wrong, as if it were coming out of a misshaped voice box. I spun around to see who had spoken, but when I looked back, it was just the procession of canines. I quickly pulled open the door and stepped out to the lobby. Margaret was sat at the desk and looked up at me worried. "What happened?" she asked. "Will got bit," I said, stammering. She just looked down with this grim look on her face, as if I just told her he died. "Yeah, it's crazy." The major freaked out about it. and took him into the secure room. I continued wiping the sweat from my forehead. She looked at me and cocked her head, confused, as if getting ready to explain a joke to me. Suddenly her eyes went wide, and she looked away from me. "Yeah, the Major takes running this place very seriously," she said, trying to stifle some emotion. Suddenly the door flew open and the Major walked into the lobby. He had some cuts and bruises like he had just gotten into a scuffle. "You all right, boss?" Margaret said as she grabbed the first aid kit from under the desk. He waved his hand as if to say he was O.K. The next day, I came in, and where it would normally be just Margaret waiting for me, the Major was standing there at the desk. As soon as I stepped through the door, he started. "Will is sick and probably going to be out for a while," the Major said as he headed for the door. "We'll never come back. At least, not in the way he was expecting." A week later, I arrived, and one of the night shift trucks was parked out front. The Major and the night shift guys were pulling cages from the bed of the truck and loading them inside. "Oh, Wyatt, you're here. Grab a crate if you need one of the guys to help. Don't be afraid to ask," the Major said as he pulled a cage with a husky in it off of the truck. I managed to struggle and pull a cage with a black lab inside it. I looked at the collar as I picked up the cage. Willie. The dog made eye contact with me, which was also something odd about the dogs. They always made eye contact with me. I looked it up one time, and apparently, dogs make eye contact with people they trust, so I guess I must be on their good side. But when Willie looked at me, he seemed calm. Before he was scared, shaking like a leaf. But he slowed down and eventually calmed down. Made carrying his cage a lot easier. After a few hours of loading and intake, such as making sure all of the dogs had their shots and checking for any tracking chips, I was left alone in the kennel room. Suddenly, as I was getting ready to walk out the door, I heard a moaning and groaning noise, like one of the dogs was in pain. I ran across the room to see what was happening, and Willie was rolling around as if he was in agony. The other dogs were all barking and screaming and howling in a mix of fear and reverence. A canine chorus of demons heralding their fanged king. He writhed, making horrible howling and groaning noises. I went to run to get help, but I heard a voice shout. And oh, the voice scream-howled at me. I ran back to see Willie had begun to change, as if his muscles were moving under his skin. His bones snapped and his joints dislocated. He slowly began to shift to a shape more like that of man. The dog's teeth seemed to retract into his head, sliding under his skin like some kind of parasite. Human hands pushed through the front paws as the paw pad slid under his fingernails. The same happened as his legs violently snapped into a straight shape like a human leg. His ears slid down his head and retracted into his head like someone pulling a sock into his head. The horrible breaking, sloughing, and groaning froze me against the wall. After what felt like hours, he sat on the floor of the cage, sweating, panting, bruised and beaten. It was Will. I stood there in shock and confusion. "Wyatt, you need to run," he panted as he reached out to grab the doors. I wasn't going to leave him behind. I grabbed the keys and began trying to find the one for this cage. Will slammed his hand on the door, rattling it. "Get out of here, Wyatt," he barked at me. "The Major can't see you now." Just then the door swung open and the Major and one of the night shift guys carrying a rifle entered. I don't know much about guns, but it looked like a military-style rifle. The kind you'd see a bad guy in an action movie use. Before I could say a word, the gun was pointed at me. My hand shot up, and I began slowly backing away. "Did he bite you?" the Major asked calmly. "No," I said, backing up against the door behind me. The Major drew a taser and shot while he screamed and shouted in pain. As I looked over at him, the man with the rifle swung the stock of it, hitting me in the head. My memory gets a little foggy from here. I fell backward through the door and slammed my head against the concrete wall before hitting the ground. I heard the Major yelling at the man and then stepping over me. I remember them grabbing my legs and dragging me towards the security door, and that's when I blacked out. I woke up, my head was pounding, I was cold, and I felt my skin touching something metal. I was bruised, and I was handcuffed behind my arms and chained to a chair with heavy iron chains. I opened my eyes, and I saw a dark, wide, open room. I wanted to scream, but I had a muzzle belted over my mouth. I realized the cold feeling. I felt I was nude sitting in a metal chair. I panicked looking around and saw another chair across from me. What was tied to another chair with a similar setup. I looked around. There were 2 cages in the room, one on each end. Suddenly, a door swung open and the major stood in the doorway. I saw several figures watching through a large bulletproof window next to the door. "I like you, Wyatt. You're hardworking, bright, and most importantly, obedient," the major said as he stepped into the room. "I think you have some serious upward mobility in this industry," he said as he continued walking towards me. "And we inspected you for bites. Seems you were telling the truth, but I feel like you need a demonstration just so you can understand exactly what we do here," he said as he drew a pistol from a holster on his belt. I tried to scream and beg, but I couldn't make a sound. He pointed the pistol at me for a moment, before suddenly turning the gun and shot Will 3 times in the chest. He groaned in pain as the bullets ripped into his flesh. But in a moment of inhuman horror, he began howling and screaming as the hot metal lodged in his chest slowly pushed backward and fell out of his flesh and into his lap. "You understand, Wyatt, that men need to manage the dogs," the major said as he stowed the pistol and drew a large knife. 60%, that seems to be the magic number," the major said as he examined the knife. In one quick fluid motion, he slashed Will's throat. It was like a hot knife through butter. Will gargled in pain as the new hole in his neck bubbled with his screaming, spurting blood out and all over the floor. The blood seemed to pour out his neck like crimson rainfall. He attempted to scream, but all that was heard was a wet spray as his supernatural flesh folded and flapped. The major turned around and wiped the knife with a rag. He threw the rag to the side and slid the knife back into the sheath on his belt. "Look, Wyatt, you need to understand how serious this is. These animals are dangerous," the major said as he walked over and kneeled before me. "But a man needs to make money," he said. "Sometimes people will pay good money to see these dogs show their strength," he said as I looked at the dried blood all over the floor. "Regular dogfighting isn't interesting anymore, but when we discovered these things, suddenly clients were far more willing to bet and pay to watch," he said as he looked around the room. "Unfortunately, Will was not a plan candidate. Usually we just find people who get infected and put them to work," the major said as he looked over at Will's body. Why? I looked past the major and saw Will's body. His flesh was rapidly breaking down, but under his skin was not just his regular shape. As his flesh began to melt, the bones and claws and teeth of his dog's body began to leak out. Bloody, fleshy paw pads fell on the ground. His face sloughed off as the bones of his canine jaw and his human skull fused as he slumped down. The major pulled off the muzzle and began to uncuff me and started to unwrap the chains holding me down. Part of me went a run, part of me just stayed still. The second part won, and I just slumped limply. The door swung open, and one of the night shift guys asked, "He all good?" "Yeah, get him his clothes," the major ordered the man in the doorway. "Hey, Wyatt, take a few days off, and then we can talk about your new position in the company," the major said as he patted his hand on my shoulder before he walked away. I sat there staring at the pile of bones, goo, blood, and melted flesh. He looked like someone had thrown a human skeleton and a dog skeleton in a tank of dark red molten wax. The guy brought in the shirt and jeans was wearing. I hollowly put on my clothes. My body moved, but my soul was trapped. My spirit was still chained to that chair. I wandered into the room where the night shift group was sitting around. I turned around and looked through the window. The large concrete basement had several floodlights set up and a set of chains attached to each end of the room. I limped through the doorway into a staircase going up. With every step, I felt my guilt weigh me down more. By the time I made it to the top of the stairs, I slowly pushed open the security door. I was in the hall. Across from me was the quiet room. I realized what it all meant. These animals, I've been taking care of their people. I had to walk through what I thought was a kennel, but was actually a prison. I stood there attempting to brace myself for their accusing eyes. I slowly opened the door, and their eyes were all glued to me. They looked with a mixture of pathetic begging and accusatory judgment. I thought, is that why they always seemed off and why they stared too long? I thought I was doing a kindness, caring for those who have no one else to depend on. I was never their caretaker. I was just another jailer. I looked down in shame and walked out the door. Margaret was in the front room, and she went to say something, but I walked out into the bitter cold night. I know I should have found a ride or found a way to get home. It was too late for the bus to be running, so I walked back to my apartment. I fell into bed and just laid there. I had no idea what to do. My mind had just been opened to something I could never understand. It felt like I was damned. What do I do now? What happened to these people? Why did I have to be part of this? What sickos were funding this? I barely moved for a few days as I let the world spin around me. Eventually, around noon on the third day, I got a text from the major. Meet this evening time, you get your promotion. I didn't say a word. I just slowly got up and got dressed. I could work from inside to see if I could find a vulnerability in their system. I would set them free. I arrived at the shelter as the sun began to sneak below the horizon. The major waited outside for me. It was the first time I had seen him smile. He pushed open the glass door, and sitting on the counter was a plastic card. Wyatt Harris, assistant caretaker. The major patted me on the back and handed me the card. Making your way up in the world, he said as he set another item on the counter. A taser with a leather holster. The yellow plastic perfectly fit in my hand as I clipped the holster onto my belt. They seem to hate a shock, so if you're in a bad spot, this can give you a few moments to get out, the major said as he patted me on the shoulder. I slowly nodded and asked, "So what am I up to now?" I asked. The major looked to the left and the right. "Now you help keep the entertainment going." We walked into the secure room. The major turned his body so I couldn't see the keypad as he tapped the buttons. Eventually, with a loud beep, the door opened. I walked down the stairs with the major through the door into the observation room. 2 cages covered with sheets sat in the concrete room. I looked up and saw people. Sitting in stands above the open room were dozens of people. I couldn't make out their faces, but they seemed to be getting into the stands and sitting to watch. Now I got what the major meant by entertainment. 2 of the guys pulled the sheets off of the cages, and sitting inside was 2 people. 2 naked, scarred men sat on the floor. The major hit the button on a PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, place your bets tonight, Colt versus Cooper," he said as he pulled a chair for me to sit. I sat down, and before me was a console of buttons. The 2 other guys inside the room who pulled the sheets came back into the control room and took seats. The major pointed at a button for me to hit. I slowly pressed the button, and the front gates off of the cages slowly lifted, opening the fronts of the cages. But they didn't move. They didn't budge. They looked pleadingly at each other, as if begging for us to let them go. The major pointed down at the console, and there was a sticky note with a lightning bolt over a large red button. I stared down at it as the major began barking orders at me to hit the button. But I hesitated. However, before I could say anything, the major slammed the button, and the 2 men convulsed as they were shocked. They screamed and howled as their bodies began to shift and change. Their skin split and muscle pushed through. Their bodies shifted as the animals took over. But they stopped halfway. Their bodies were turned into fleshy, half-melted dogmen. Their bodies looked like they were made out of molten wax that had been flash frozen into a canine human shape. The muscular and fanged bodies slowly stalked out of the cages. They ripped into each other. Their bodies began reforming and regenerating as their bodies immediately began healing as they ripped off chunks of flesh. And this was my life for the next few weeks. I walked dogs during the day and facilitated their torture at night. They battled each other and grappled, but none of them got to die. They would all just come back. After one temporarily would collapse, we would electrocute them into submission, then dump them back into the kennel as their bodies would slowly reform into their dog shape. Eventually, the major stopped hiding the code from me. I saw where he kept his keys. I ultimately had a plan. All I needed to do was release the dogs. One day, the golden opportunity suddenly opened one day for me. We were bringing in 2 dogs to do another match, Gage and Bandit. All of the employees with the rifles and cattle prods stood around waiting for seemingly anything to go wrong. And as we were closing the cages, the door mechanism broke and dropped the heavy metal door on the major's foot. He screamed and howled in pain. But the moment the door jammed and wouldn't close it happened. Suddenly Gage's giant clawed hand lurched out and grabbed at the Major. The Major screamed and pulled his pistol, firing wildly into the cage. I took this as my moment. I jumped onto the Major, knocking him to the ground. He screamed, "Get thee off me." I popped the button on his belt and snatched his keyring. As I jumped up and ran, I heard several cracks as bullets passed me, hitting the concrete walls. I threw the door open and looked over at the control panel. I slammed the door behind me, locking it. The night shift guard began firing into the cages of the dogmen inside. I looked down at the control panel and just started smashing buttons. The electric mechanisms whirred and ground as the cage doors began opening. The giant monsters began ripping into the men. The predatory fury splattered against the bulletproof glass. One of the beasts paused and looked at me through the window. "Gage." He paused for a moment before returning to the slaughter like he was thanking me for my part. I ran upstairs through the secure room and went into the kennel. The dogs were all silent. They stared blankly at me. I quickly got to work opening the cages, though they still didn't move. I ripped the doors open and stepped into the doorway into the lobby. The dogs didn't move, just stared, though suddenly they looked towards the hallway across from me. Then I heard it, crashing. They made it through the first door. They're coming upstairs. I ran into the lobby, and as I was about to run out the glass door, I heard it, the clicking of a revolver. I turned, and Margaret stood holding the gun. She opened her mouth to speak as the furred tide poured out of the door. All of them ran free, jumping atop her, ripping her to shreds, leaving her a pile of bone and mush. It was my turn. I may have opened the doors, but I still jailed them. They ran, knocking me to the ground and shattering the glass of the building. They attacked me, clawing and slashing into me. But they decided to be merciful, leaving me lying on the ground, bleeding and wheezing. I lay there, still holding on, falling in and out of consciousness. Eventually, the police arrived to find me. I was rushed to the hospital. After a few days of questions and tests, I was sent home. Now comes the reason I'm posting this. One of them bit me. I don't remember which one, but ever since then I've felt different. I keep blacking out and waking up, and I can hear them, barking, growling, howling. I can feel their nails, scratching at the inside of my skin. I can see the bones sliding under my muscles. I clawed my nails off on my floorboards to try and get them out. My bleeding fingernails pushed out to reveal claws. I've been sitting here feeling it. As the ribbons of my flesh begin slowly sloughing off my body, I feel it coming. My mind is slipping. My new instincts are slowly taking over. I'm so hungry. I already try to swallow pills, slice open my wrists, something. I need to find Silver. But I'm so hungry. 12th story. My dog and I found a demon in the Arizonan desert. The Superstition Mountains, to be exact, which around here are just called the Superstitions. They stick up from the dirt and dust like a dragon's back molar. Thick, otherworldly, sinister. There are stories about this place, legends of lost Dutchmen and lore of hidden gold. And many people have spent a good deal of time out here digging and climbing and spelunking, trying to find it, claim it. Me being one of them. Now, I've been up the Superstitions a couple times before, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, but the day I discovered the demon, I was with my dog, Charles. We were like all those who came before us, looking for the lost Dutchman's gold mine, a place said to hold all the riches you could ever want. And though I thought it was just a silly tale, a reason to get my ass off the couch and out hiking, in a way and secretly I wanted it. And I wanted it bad. That day, Charles and I were out there from dusk till dawn, surveying the land, hiking around the peaks and the crags, feasting on ill-made sandwiches and the scraps, looking for something unusual and peculiar and shiny. It was nearing full dark when we found it. A small red blip in the rocks, a door. It was rusted, reddish, corroded like it was sick and was rotting from the inside out. I walked towards it, puzzled and intrigued. Beside me, Charles panted and watched me with deep trust. There was something about it, and it piqued my curiosity. And for some reason indeterminable by me, I just had to know what was inside. As I got closer to it, I realized there was a large angular key sticking out from the exact middle of it, almost like someone had opened it and, in their excitement, left it there. I reached out tentatively, not knowing what would happen. The door was hot to the touch, almost scalding. I bumped it with the tips of my fingers, and it swung open, slightly revealing an impenetrable darkness beyond and the faint smell of lilac. I looked back at Charles, who was standing behind me, watching me. He met my gaze and wagged his tail. "Come on," I said, deciding then and there that this had to be it. This had to be where all that gold was hidden. And I found it. We found it. Charles was going to get a big steak tonight. Using a rock, I bumped the door more open and clambered inside, Charles close on my heels. After a moment's thought, I reached out and grabbed the key. It was surprisingly cold, and I pocketed it. Almost immediately, the door slammed shut like someone had pulled it closed. Someone angry. There was a singular hissing noise, the kind steam might make if let out of a hole too small. And then, just like that, we were enclosed in complete darkness. Charles started growling, low and insistent. Spooked, I flicked my headlamp on and swung it around the space. We were in a small cave of some sort with what looked like a rather large tunnel leading down into the darkness. There were rows and rows of stalagmites and stalactites sticking out from the cave around us. It looked like bared teeth. From around one of the large stalagmites, or stalactite, I can never tell the difference, a human leg popped in and out of view. It looked small, maybe a woman's or teen's leg, and it was wearing a bright yellow high top covered in blue flowers. Peonies, maybe. Hello. The voice sounded different, like none I had ever heard before, like a man and a woman speaking at the same time, but in harmony. High-pitched and excited. So damn excited. Hello. Hello. I know your name. Yeah, I'm not telling you my real name. Do you want to know how? My heart pounded its way up and into my mouth, choking me, making it hard to speak. Who are you? There was a pause, and in that moment, the steady stream of Charles's low growl overtook the space. Oh, no, dog. The voice paused, then spoke again, its voice dropping in pitch faster than my stomach. I think you should run now. Not wanting to take my eyes away from the foot, I felt behind me with my hands, trying to find the borders of the rusted red door. But I couldn't. Finally, I turned and saw that it was gone. The damn thing had disappeared. A sick laughter boiled up from behind me, pouring over me, drenching me with fear. Beside me, Charles started barking aloud, mad bark. Fully panicked now, I turned and focused on the only opening I could see, that long, dark, perfectly carved tunnel. It went down, down, down into the darkness beyond. Come on, Char. We took off, and as we ran, the laughter never got farther away, but stayed right there behind us, as if it was coming out of the goddamn walls themselves. The tunnel went all the way down into an enormous room with high, angular walls. It was so big I couldn't see where anything ended. Charles and I rounded the corner, and my heart stopped. Voices, male and female, echoed up to me from the rear of the room. Then, as I watched, two people appeared out of the darkness before I even had time to react. I stood there, Charles by my side, out in the open, until they noticed me. They were talking about something. In retrospect, the guy was saying, I still think I should have apologized about the dog. Shit way to die. Guy is probably still in shock. Yeah, the girl interrupted, but you save his life. And cleaned up. And that's what matters, not the, who are you? They both stopped short, seeing me standing in the middle of the tunnel. And it's what they were wearing that made me hesitate more than anything else. The guy was decked out in, and I mean this in the most literal way possible, full tactical gear, complete with some sort of night vision goggles / gas mask combination. He was also, inexplicably, holding a broken guitar. The girl, who looked to be in her 20s, maybe older or younger, was wearing a ratty, muddy Burzum shirt, ripped shorts, and green flip-flops. I looked between them, not knowing what to say. Instead, Charles took a tentative step forward and made the first comment, a small woofing sound, curious and yet surprisingly blunt. He was looking directly at the girl. What are you on about? She looked directly back at Charles. The guy and I looked between them for a moment. Me confused, he amused. And then the guy looked up at me and said, no, seriously, how the hell did you get in here? How are you alive? His voice was slightly muffled by the mask. I gaped at them before finding my voice and telling them, honestly, there was a door and a key, a weird cold black one. I have it here. I slid it from my pocket and showed them briefly. The guy in the gas mask didn't respond, but instead looked down at the girl who looked back up and shot him a guilty grin. He shook his head and looked back at me. And you're okay? Yeah, I said. But alive? What did you mean by that? The girl, who had turned her attention back to Charles, laughed and said, what? Did you not see that large reptilian on your way down? Have you not heard the legends? What they say about this place? Reptilian? The guy looked over at the girl, then back at me and pushed his goggles/mask up on his head so I could see his eyes, his face. She means demon. A demon. I laughed. What? Isn't this just the lost Dutchman's mine? You guys are just searching for the treasure and decided to play a spooky little trick on me, right? It was the guy's turn to laugh, and he did heartily. Oh man, are you in for one hell of shock? Turn around, but do it slowly, like your life depended on it. A freakish, low laughter shook the walls of the cave, and I turned around, slowly, just like the guy told me to do. At first, I didn't see anything, but as my eyes adjusted to the light, I saw it. There, just by the shadows of an oddly shaped boulder, a foot. The same foot, wearing that same yellow shoe. Except the peonies were red now. Bright red. It did a little jig. I turned back to look at the man, my eyes wide in shock and disbelief. He just looked back at me with an I know, right? expression, then cleared his throat and said, "What are you most afraid of, bud?" "What? That's a weird thing to ask someone." "Fair," he replied, "but just tell me so we're ready." He gestured to the girl and himself. The girl, though, she just shook her head and muttered, "Yeah, no. Just him. What am I most scared of?" "Yep. I don't know, crushing debt." This got a small, quick burst of laughter from the guy. "No, no," he said, still smiling. "Like your nightmares." "What are they made of?" The girl scoffed and rolled her eyes at the guy beside her. "That's a stupid way of asking that question, bud." And she looked at me. "Ever read IT? By Stephen the King of Horror?" "Tried, but that book is long." "Yeah, but imagine that." "What? What?" The guy cleared his throat, obviously wanting to help. "Wasn't there the same thing in that book with that wizard boy Messiah?" It was the girl's turn to laugh. "Harry Potter. And yeah, the Boggart. But what do you think she got the idea from, huh?" The guy shrugged, looked at her straight-faced, then said with sarcasm, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe they both got it from all that demonology and lore and mythology shit we just spent hours reading. Because, it's a basic human archetype of fear itself." The girl made an angry, sort of growling noise at the guy, then turned back to me and said, "It's a goddamn thing that changes into whatever you fear most. Aliens, reptilians, deadites, Nazis, giant bugs, werewolves, that kind of shit. I guess you could call it demon. Werewolves, eh." The guy smirked at the girl who rolled her eyes. "Hey," she said to him, "shut up." While they were talking, and I was watching them, totally bemused, none of us had noticed Charles creepy ever so tentatively toward the foot. He must have been hypnotized or something, because that dog never leaves my side. A small yelping sound burst out behind us, and we all turned at the same moment to see a hideous creature crouched on all fours with Charles pinned beneath it. And yeah, okay. If I had to pick a thing, I would say that slimy and scaly dead thing, with rotten skin and yellowed pointed teeth, and that weird ass-jerking stop-motion movement, wearing the same outfit my ex wore when I saw her last. That thing was the thing I was scared of most. "No," the guy bellowed, dropping the broken guitar and pulling out the biggest handgun I have ever seen. "Not another goddamn dog. You better cover your ears," the girl said. "And eyes," she added as an afterthought. And the guy, without so much as 2 seconds of time to aim, blasted that gun right at that thing. The flash from the tip of the barrel was blindingly bright, too bright. And the subsequent boom was heart and head shatteringly loud. The bullet hit the thing in the shoulder and blew off a large portion of it, splattering the wall behind it black with goo. It screamed and transformed. I thought it might turn into the reptilian the girl had mentioned, but it didn't. Instead, it turned into another man, a normal-looking guy. He wore a white shirt, blue jeans, and cowboy boots. And despite the wound on his shoulder, he stooped and picked up Charles, holding him high, blocking his face with his body. Charles growled and snapped and whimpered. Next to me, the girl made a shocked face and looked between the man in the cowboy boots and the guy with the gun. Well, shit. The guy was still aiming at the thing, but was hesitant to fire, clearly not wanting to hit Charles. He was also very clearly ignoring the girl's reaction, too. She looked back from the guy to the man in the cowboy boots and seemed to decide something. She opened her mouth and started to sing. I had visions. I was in them / I was looking into the mirror / to see a little bit clearer / rottenness and evil in me. A look of sheer disbelief crossed the guy's face, and he chanced a glance back at the girl. Really? Of all songs? That's the one. That's the one you choose. She just smiled and kept singing. The guy looked over at me grinning and lowered his gun, but only slightly. See, he said over the voice of the singing girl, glancing between me and that monster. Music. Any kind of music controls it. You don't necessarily have to play an instrument or even be that good. The girl shot him a glare, still singing, but as long as there's some beat to it, well, he gestured at the demon with his head. I looked over at it and laughed. I couldn't help it. The creature, it was just swaying and swaying to her singing, no matter how off-key and warbling it was. It had transformed again from a man to a large, reptilian. 7 feet tall, with shiny blue-green scales and yellow diamond-shaped eyes. It twirled suddenly, dropping Charles in the process. He yelped and scrambled over to me, limping. There was a large gash on his left flank, and it was gushing blood. Here, the guy said, kneeling down and placing his gun on the ground. I can stop the bleeding, hold him. He pulled some sort of liquid bandage out of his vest and swiftly, but precisely stemmed the flow of blood from Charles's leg. I thanked him, then looked back up at the girl, and that thing slightly afraid but more amused. She was still singing, but she was doing something else now. Dancing, right up next to the reptilian, who was now wearing a cowboy hat and a ridiculously campy grin. Dancing with your demons? She nodded, still singing. I looked over to the guy. Kinda poetic, huh? Kinda, he said, patting Charles on the head and standing up. Now stay put. We're gonna go put this asshole back where it belongs. They left, the singing girl leading the way, the dancing reptilian following, and the guy, gas mask / goggles back on, bringing up the rear with his gun trained on it. They returned about 15 minutes later and escorted me back to the cave I had entered from. The door was still gone, and we stood there for nearly a full minute before the guy reached forward towards me and said, "Key." Whoa. I reached into my pocket, pulled the key out, and handed it to him. He flipped his goggles down and surveyed the walls around us for a moment. Suddenly, he strode forward and stuck the key straight into the bedrock and turned it. There was a resounding click, and slowly, the rusted red door reappeared, like it had been there the whole time, and some trick of the light or the way it was built into the rock prevented me from seeing it. But the door, I said in complete disbelief, it disappeared. Yeah, the guy said. It tends to do that when it's locked. But this bad boy here, he wiggled the key at me. It tends to, light it up. He tapped his goggles, then turned and swung the door open to a sweet, sweet rush of fresh air. And just like that, we were out. Between us, the guy and I got Charles down the mountain, while the girl trailed behind, humming snatches of that song every so often. We stopped near one of the trailheads, where 3 cars were parked. The moon was high in the sky, and there was a slight, cool breeze blowing in from the west. Above us, the stars twinkled mischievously, like they knew deep, dark secrets they were just bursting to spill. I was still carrying Charles, who was whimpering slightly, and the guy glanced sideways at him with a look of what can only be described as concern on his face. He turned to me, digging for something in one of the front pockets of his black vest. "Here," he said finally, pulling out a wad of paper. "Get him looked at," he nodded at Charles. "Let me pay for it." He handed the wad of paper to me, and I looked down at it, seeing immediately that it was at least 2 dozen $50 bills. I looked back up at him and said, "Really? It's just money. Get yourself something too. Try to forget about that." He gestured to the rusted metal door with his head. The girl looked over at him imploringly. "Oh, can I have some money too?" He laughed in the girl's face and said, "Shut up. Then look back at me. Forget about this place, okay? Don't tell anyone about it, or about us. They might come out here looking for answers. It's not safe. And we wouldn't want anyone getting all the way, down there." He paused, thoughtful, then added, "I mean it." Then to the girl, he said, "Come on." And they turned towards the black car. I watched them for a few seconds before yelling, "Wait, what exactly is down there?" The girl huffed and climbed into the passenger seat. But the guy, well, he turned back, grinned widely, and said something with a small wink. And it was the way he said it, all of it playfully enticing, like what he really wanted was for people to go out and explore and find out the truth for themselves. It was how he said it that made me decide to write this all down and share it with you all. I think it's what he really wanted. What did he say? He said, "Why the gateway to hell itself?" Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comment section.